The morning air was warm and soft when David stepped out of his car in front of the tall glass hotel. He had flown in for an important meeting that could open new doors for his company, a growing investment firm that had been helping small businesses for years. The hotel was one of the finest in the area, known for hosting executives and international guests. Everything about it spoke of class and comfort. David, dressed in a clean navy suit, carried only his laptop bag and a calm smile. He was on time, as always. Inside the lobby, a light scent of coffee and polished wood filled the air. The floor shone, and guests moved around with quiet purpose. David walked straight to the reception desk, where a young woman greeted him with a practiced smile. He returned it politely and said, "Good morning, I'm here to use the business conference room. It was booked under my company name." He gave his ID and confirmation email on his phone. The woman typed something on her computer, her smile fading slightly. She looked uncertain. Give me just a moment, sir," she said, clicking through the screen. Another staff member, an older man in a dark suit, came over to whisper something to her. David noticed the quick glance they exchanged. It wasn't the kind of look you give when checking a reservation. It was something else, a quiet hesitation that said more than words. After a pause, the woman turned back and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be an issue with the room. It's not available right now." David frowned slightly. "That's strange. I booked it 3 days ago and confirmed this morning. Is it under maintenance or double booked?" She hesitated. "It's just not available at the moment." David nodded slowly. He could tell she was uncomfortable. He could also tell she wasn't giving the real reason. The older man behind her crossed his arms and avoided eye contact. "Is there another business room I can use?" David asked, keeping his tone calm and respectful. "No, unfortunately all are full today," the woman replied quickly. David looked around the lobby. It wasn't busy. The chairs were half empty, and the front desk had only one other guest. Something didn't add up. He took a breath, then asked quietly, "Is there a manager I can speak with?" The older man stepped forward, his face polite but distant. "I'm the manager, sir, and unfortunately the room is unavailable. We apologize for the inconvenience." David met his eyes for a moment. He saw the stiffness there, the tone that said, "We don't want you here." It wasn't new to him. He had faced it many times before, in boardrooms, restaurants, airports. Still, he refused to let bitterness take control. He smiled lightly and said, "That's all right. Thank you for checking." He picked up his bag and stepped aside to sit in the lounge area. The receptionist looked relieved. The manager disappeared into an office, and the soft piano music in the lobby filled the silence that followed. David sat there for a few minutes, looking calm on the outside but thoughtful on the inside. He had worked too hard to let this moment ruin his day. He took out his phone, scrolled through his emails, and then stopped at a message from a real estate contact he had spoken to weeks earlier. Someone who had mentioned this very hotel being in financial trouble. He smiled slightly, not out of anger but out of understanding. Sometimes life placed people in strange positions for a reason. Before he made any decisions, he wanted to take a moment to think. He stood, walked over to the coffee area, and poured himself a cup. A few guests looked at him curiously, maybe recognizing him from business news articles, but he didn't say anything. He just sat by the window sipping his coffee, watching the cars pass outside. In that moment, he remembered how far he had come. He remembered days when he couldn't even afford to stay in a hotel like this, let alone book a business suite. The memory brought a quiet smile to his face. Rejection had followed him many times in life, but each time it had pushed him forward instead of stopping him. As he looked around the lobby again, he noticed how carefully the staff avoided his eyes. It wasn't anger he felt, it was clarity. He had seen enough in life to know that success isn't just about money or status. It's about control over how you respond when someone tries to make you feel small. He finished his coffee, stood up, and walked out to the parking lot. The air outside felt different, freer. He opened his car door, sat down, and leaned back. For a few seconds, he just closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Then, with calm precision, he dialed a number from his contact list. "Hey, this is David. You mentioned a few weeks ago that the hotel near the downtown business district might be available for purchase. Is that still on the market?" The person on the other end paused, surprised. "Actually, yes. The management company has been struggling. They're looking for buyers who can act fast. Are you interested? David smiled faintly. Yes, very interested. He hung up and leaned back again, letting the thought sink in. 10 minutes earlier, he had been turned away from a simple conference room. Now he was considering buying the entire building. It wasn't about revenge. It was about turning a closed door into a new opportunity. His phone buzzed again, an update from his real estate team confirming that negotiations could start immediately. Everything was moving quickly. He looked through the car window at the hotel entrance where the same receptionist stood, smiling at another guest. He didn't feel anger. If anything, he felt peace. The universe had its way of balancing things out. He decided to stay nearby until things were confirmed. While waiting, he thought about what this place could become under better management. A place where every guest was treated with respect, where success wasn't measured by appearance but by effort and integrity. He imagined the lobby filled with energy and inclusiveness, not quiet judgment. Minutes later, his phone rang again. The voice on the other end said, "It's done. The hotel's management has accepted the preliminary offer. Paperwork will follow within the hour." David closed his eyes for a second, taking in the words. A small laugh escaped him, not out of arrogance, but relief. He whispered to himself, "All right then, let's make this place better." He stepped out of his car once more, walked toward the hotel entrance with quiet confidence, and pushed the glass doors open. The same staff who had refused him earlier looked up. They recognized him but couldn't quite place what had changed in his expression. He approached the front desk again, polite as ever. "Good afternoon," he said with a smile. "Can you please let your general manager know that I need a few minutes of his time? Tell him it's regarding ownership matters." The receptionist blinked, confused. "Ownership?" she asked. David just smiled kindly. "Yes, he'll understand." The woman picked up the phone, made a quick call, and within a minute the manager walked out. When he saw David standing there again, his brows furrowed slightly. "Sir, how can I help you?" David handed him a folder. Inside were documents confirming the purchase agreement. The manager's eyes widened slightly as he skimmed through the first few pages. David said quietly, "I just wanted to introduce myself properly. I'm the new owner. We'll be reviewing operations soon, so please inform your staff that there will be some changes in how we handle guests." The room fell silent. The receptionist froze behind the counter. The other staff members nearby pretended not to listen, though every ear in the room caught every word. David's tone stayed gentle, calm, and respectful. There was no anger in it, just quiet authority. He reached out his hand to the manager. "I look forward to working with you," he said. The man hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand, clearly unsure of what to say. David turned to leave, his steps steady and confident. Before exiting, he looked back once more, not with pride but with peace. Life had taught him that sometimes the best way to respond to disrespect was not with words but with growth. Outside, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, reflecting off the hotel windows. David stood there for a moment, watching the reflection. He wasn't just seeing glass and steel anymore. He was seeing possibility, the chance to create something better. And with that quiet thought, he walked to his car, knowing this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. Long before the polished suits, long before people called him a CEO, David was just a kid with big dreams and a deep hunger to make something of himself. He grew up in a small neighborhood where people knew each other by name, where kids played football in the dusty streets, and where every day brought new lessons about survival. Life wasn't easy. His parents worked long hours, and there were nights when the power would go out, leaving the family sitting by candlelight, talking about better days that hadn't yet come. David's father often told him, "Don't ever let someone tell you what you can't do." His mother always added, "Work hard and stay humble. The world may not always be fair, but it respects effort." Those words stayed with him like a quiet rhythm that guided every choice he made. In school, David wasn't the loudest or the most popular kid. He was the observer, the one who sat at the back of the class watching how people acted, how teachers spoke, and how small decisions shaped big outcomes. He learned early that success wasn't about luck. It was about paying attention. His grades were strong, but what really set him apart was his ability to understand people. He could sense when someone was sincere or pretending. That skill would later become one of his greatest business tools. As a teenager, David started finding ways to earn his own money. He helped neighbors fix broken bikes, washed cars, and sold homemade snacks after school. He wasn't doing it just for cash. He wanted to learn how things worked, how to talk to people, how to make something from nothing. The feeling of handing his mother a few earned bills was better than any gift. It made him realize that control over one's life began with independence. After high school, college seemed like a faraway dream. Money was tight and no one in his family had gone before. But David had a plan. He applied for scholarships and took part-time jobs. Anything that could help him move forward. There were days when he'd work late in a small convenience store, come home after midnight, and then study until dawn. Sleep was a luxury, but ambition kept him awake. He believed that every hour spent learning would pay off someday. His persistence finally paid off when he earned a place at a respected university. Walking into that campus for the first time felt like stepping into another world. The buildings were tall, the students confident, and everything seemed to move faster. At first, he felt out of place. Most of his classmates came from wealthy families. They talked about vacations abroad, private schools, and business connections. David didn't have any of that, but what he did have was focus. He spent his free time reading about entrepreneurs, business strategies, and leadership. Instead of parties, he attended workshops. Instead of complaining about what he didn't have, he looked for opportunities. One professor noticed his dedication and became his mentor. She taught him that success wasn't about being the smartest person in the room, but about being the most consistent. That idea changed his life. After graduation, David faced another challenge, finding his place in the business world. He started working at a small finance company. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave him exposure to the real world of deals, investments, and negotiations. He watched how managers handled clients and how money flowed. He also saw how often people like him were overlooked. Meetings were sometimes filled with polite smiles that hid silent doubts about his abilities. But instead of letting it crush him, he let it fuel him. David began saving every bit of money he could. He lived simply, rented a small apartment, and poured his energy into learning. He started a side business offering advice to small startups, helping them organize finances and pitch ideas to investors. Many of those startups were run by people who had talent, but lacked access to the right rooms. David became their bridge. Slowly, his network grew. One client introduced him to another, and soon his weekends were filled with business meetings instead of rest. It was exhausting, but he loved every part of it. The feeling of helping someone succeed reminded him of where he came from. The same dusty streets where people dreamed but often couldn't find a way forward. There were tough years, too. Times when deals fell apart, when bills piled up, and when doubt crept in late at night. He remembered one winter when his company almost shut down. He had invested in a project that didn't work out, and his bank account nearly emptied. But instead of giving up, he regrouped. He studied what went wrong and used those lessons to make better choices. Every failure became a teacher. Over time, his company found its rhythm. He hired a small but loyal team that believed in his vision. Together, they built an investment firm that focused on supporting small businesses, especially those started by people who were often ignored by traditional banks. David believed that everyone deserved a chance to build something of their own. Under his leadership, many of those businesses thrived and his reputation began to spread. He never forgot where he came from, though. He visited his old neighborhood often, speaking to young people about persistence and discipline. He told them stories of his struggles, not to impress them, but to remind them that success doesn't come overnight. He always said, "You don't have to start big. Just start with what you have and don't stop." As his company expanded, David started traveling for meetings across cities and countries. Each new place taught him something new about people, culture, and opportunity. He remained grounded, polite, and observant, the same qualities that had carried him from his childhood to that moment. He learned to read rooms, not just books. He learned that the world of business was often more about trust than numbers. Deals didn't always happen because of contracts. They happened because people believed in you. David made it his mission to be that kind of leader, one whose word meant more than his signature. Through all his success, he faced moments that reminded him of how the world still worked. There were still doors that didn't open easily, still people who doubted his worth before knowing his story. But by then, David had mastered the art of composure. He had learned that the best response to doubt wasn't anger, it was excellence. One of his closest friends once told him, "Man, How do you stay so calm when people underestimate you? David had smiled and said, because I know who I am. Their opinion doesn't define me. My results do. That sentence summed up everything he believed. As his company grew stronger, David began exploring new industries. Real estate became one of them. He saw it as more than just property, it was legacy. Buildings could tell stories just like people. When he heard about hotels struggling to stay afloat, he didn't just see business opportunities. He saw chances to rebuild environments with better values. That mindset led him to his latest trip, the one where he booked a business room in a hotel that would soon become his. He didn't know that morning would turn into such a defining moment. But when life tested him again, he was ready. Looking back, every hardship, every rejection, every long night of studying, and every quiet act of patience had prepared him for that day. The boy who once fixed bikes for pocket change had turned into a man who could change entire systems. But he hadn't lost his humility. Success, for David, wasn't about owning more. It was about proving that dignity and patience could take a person further than anger or pride ever could. As he sat in his car that afternoon after being denied the business room, all those memories came flooding back. They didn't make him sad. They reminded him of his journey. Every person who had looked down on him had unknowingly given him motivation to rise higher. Every door that had been closed had pushed him to build his own. That's why, when he made the call to inquire about the hotel's ownership, he did it with a calm heart. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply doing what he had always done, turning obstacles into opportunities. His success wasn't built on revenge. It was built on vision. If anyone had asked him at that moment what kept him going, he would have said, I don't chase respect anymore. I earn it through how I handle the moments that test me. And that belief had carried him from the bottom all the way to the top. The young boy who once dreamed under candlelight was now a man rewriting the definition of success, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The sun was starting to dip behind the tall buildings as David sat quietly in his car, watching the hotel through the windshield. The same hotel that had just turned him away now stood in front of him like a silent challenge. The soft hum of traffic filled the air, but his mind was calm. He wasn't thinking about anger or revenge. He was thinking about purpose. Every moment in his life had taught him to look beyond the surface, to find opportunity where others saw rejection. And right now, that lesson was about to take on a whole new meaning. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from his real estate advisor, confirming that the hotel was still for sale. The management company had been struggling to keep it profitable, and the owners were eager to sell to the right investor. David smiled faintly. He had built his career by noticing potential others ignored. To most people, this place was just another property. To him, it was a symbol, one that represented transformation. He stepped out of the car and walked across the parking lot, thinking about how life had come full circle. 10 minutes earlier, he had been told that the business room he booked was suddenly unavailable. Now he was preparing to make a decision that could change everything. He didn't need to prove anyone wrong. He just wanted to set something right. He got back into his car, took a deep breath, and dialed the number of his investment partner, Daniel. They had worked together for years, handling several property deals. When Daniel picked up, his voice was curious. "What's going on, David?" "You don't usually call after hours." David chuckled softly. "I'm looking at a hotel right now. The same one we talked about last quarter, the one near the business district." Daniel sounded surprised. "The one with the management issue?" "Yes, I think it's time we move forward with it." There was a short silence on the line. Then Daniel said, "You're serious?" "Completely," David replied. "I want to make an offer tonight." Daniel knew David well enough to recognize that tone. When he spoke like that, steady, thoughtful, certain, it meant he had already made up his mind. "All right," Daniel said finally. "I'll start the paperwork. Do you want me to reach out to the brokers directly?" "Yes, tell them we'll handle it fast." After ending the call, David leaned back in his seat. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed calm confidence, but inside, he felt something deeper. Not pride, but purpose. The hotel wasn't just a building. It was a statement. A reminder that no amount of bias or closed-mindedness could stop progress when it came from integrity and vision. He drove to a nearby cafe to wait for updates from his team. The evening crowd buzzed with conversation, but he barely noticed. He ordered a cup of coffee and opened his laptop, reviewing property data and financial reports. His focus was sharp and his decisions precise. Years of discipline had trained him for moments like this. By the time Daniel called back, the offer was ready to go. "Done," Daniel said over the phone. "The sellers are eager. They've already sent over preliminary terms. You might own that place before midnight," David smiled. "Good. Let's make sure we do everything clean and professional. I want the transition smooth." As he closed his laptop, he looked out the cafe window at the glowing lights of the city. Somewhere among those lights was that same hotel, standing tall but tired, waiting for change, and he would be the one to bring it. When the deal was confirmed an hour later, David drove back to the hotel. The night air was cooler now and the parking lot was quieter. He walked into the lobby once again, his footsteps soft against the polished floor. The receptionist from earlier was still at the counter, her posture straight but slightly tense when she saw him. "Good evening again," David said gently. The woman's eyes widened slightly, unsure if he had come back to complain. "Oh, sir, is there something wrong?" "Not at all," he replied with a calm smile. "I just wanted to speak with your manager again." She nodded quickly, picking up the phone. Within moments, the same manager appeared. His expression carried a trace of annoyance, as though he thought David had returned to argue. But when he saw the calm, confident look in David's eyes, his tone softened a little. "Yes, sir? Can I help you?" David held out a folder. "You can start by reading this." The manager took the papers, scanning them. His eyes widened slightly when he reached the page that listed the new ownership details. He looked up, disbelief written all over his face. I don't understand." David smiled lightly. "You don't have to. Just know that as of tonight, I've acquired the hotel through my company. The paperwork is being finalized as we speak." The manager blinked, clearly trying to find words. The receptionist froze, her mouth slightly open. The lobby went quiet, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the air conditioner. David continued in a calm, even voice. "I'll be making some changes soon. I believe this place has great potential, but it needs a fresh start. New leadership, new culture, new values." He looked directly at the manager. "Starting tomorrow, I want to meet the staff. We'll talk about new training programs, customer service standards, and what kind of image we want to build moving forward." The man nodded slowly, still in shock. "Yes, of course. I'll arrange everything." David smiled. "Thank you. And don't worry, I don't hold grudges. I believe in improvement, not punishment. Let's make this hotel better together." He turned and began walking toward the exit. The receptionist called out softly, "Sir, congratulations." David turned back and gave a kind nod. "Thank you." Then he stepped outside into the night. The city lights reflected off the glass doors as they closed behind him. He paused for a moment on the sidewalk, breathing in the cool air. This wasn't just a business win, it was personal growth in motion. The world had just shown him another test, and he had passed it with grace. As he stood there, a memory from his childhood returned. He remembered his father telling him, "The best way to respond to disrespect is by building something no one can ignore." That memory brought a soft smile to his face. He realized he had lived those words today without even thinking about it. Driving back to his hotel room that night, David felt both exhausted and fulfilled. He wasn't excited about owning another property. What filled him with peace was knowing that he had taken something negative and turned it into something positive. He thought about all the people who would work under him now, the receptionists, cleaners, servers, and managers. He wanted them to feel proud of where they worked, to know that their environment would be fair and respectful. In the days that followed, David began transforming the place. He didn't fire anyone. Instead, he held meetings, asked questions, and listened. He learned that many of the employees had been unhappy under the old management, but had stayed because they needed their jobs. He told them, "We're not just going to run a hotel. We're going to create an experience people remember." His tone was always calm, his actions always measured. The staff soon realized he wasn't just another businessman, he was a leader. He changed the way hiring worked, focusing on character and professionalism rather than surface impressions. He brought in new trainers to teach communication, hospitality, and teamwork. Slowly, the mood of the hotel began to shift. Guests noticed the difference too. Reviews improved. The same place that had once struggled to stay open was now becoming one of the most talked-about hotels in the city. Every evening, David would walk through the lobby, greeting staff and checking details. He paid attention to everything, from the way guests were greeted to the way rooms smelled. His presence wasn't about control. It was about care. People worked harder because they respected him, not because they feared him. Months passed and the transformation became visible. New lighting, fresh paint, improved service, everything reflected his vision. But what meant most to him was seeing his team proud of their work. One day, the receptionist who had once refused him approached him shyly. "Sir," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. I didn't know who you were that day, but I've learned a lot since then. I'm really grateful to still be here." David smiled gently. "We all learn, don't we? What matters is that we grow." That moment reminded him why he did what he did. Success wasn't just about money or status, it was about creating change. Real change. The kind that stayed in people's hearts. Late one evening, as he stood in the lobby alone, looking around at the warm lights and the steady hum of business, David felt a quiet sense of pride. Not the kind that made a person arrogant, but the kind that came from knowing he had turned a moment of rejection into a story of renewal. This hotel wasn't just another property in his portfolio. It was proof that dignity, patience, and persistence could transform anything. He thought about his younger self, the boy who once dreamed under candlelight, and smiled. He had kept his promise to that boy. No matter how far he went, he never let the world change his heart. And as the city lights shimmered outside the glass, the air inside the hotel lobby felt colder than before, though the sun was shining outside. The same people who had looked down on him earlier were still at their posts, unaware that the quiet man they had refused just half an hour ago was now returning with a completely different purpose. He walked in with slow, steady steps, dressed neatly as always, his face calm and unreadable. Two people followed him, a man in a suit holding a folder and a woman with a tablet in hand. They were representatives from a real estate firm, and their arrival already started turning heads. The receptionist looked up and froze for a second. Her smile faltered, then she forced it back. She probably thought he had come to argue about what happened earlier. Instead, he greeted her politely and asked to speak with the general manager. There was no anger in his tone, only a quiet confidence that made her uncomfortable. She hesitated, then picked up the phone to call the manager. A few minutes later, a tall man in a gray suit walked in. He looked professional but slightly tense, the kind of person who tried to read every situation before reacting. The man extended his hand first. "Good afternoon," he said. The CEO shook it firmly and smiled. "Good afternoon. I'm here to finalize something important about this property." The manager looked confused. "Property?" he asked. The CEO nodded toward the two people beside him. They handed the manager a folder. Inside were documents bearing the hotel's name, and right there in bold letters was a purchase agreement. For a moment, silence filled the room. The manager blinked, trying to process what he was reading. The receptionist behind the counter stood frozen, pretending to look busy while listening to every word. The CEO's expression never changed. He just stood there quietly, watching as the realization slowly spread across their faces. "I believe there was some misunderstanding earlier when I came here to use your business suite," he said calmly. "But now I suppose I can choose any room I like." The words were simple, but the message hit deep. The manager's lips parted slightly, unsure what to say. He looked again at the papers, then back at the calm man in front of him. Everything in the documents was official. The transfer of ownership, the investment agreement, the signatures from both sides. The property that had once rejected him now belonged to him. The receptionist's face turned pale. She lowered her eyes, realizing that her earlier attitude had just come back to face her in a way she could never have imagined. The CEO didn't look at her with anger or pride. He just said in a low, steady tone, "I hope this hotel becomes a place where every guest feels respected, no matter who they are." The manager cleared his throat and nodded quickly. "Of course," he said, his voice a bit shaky. I'll make sure of that." The CEO gave a polite nod. "Good. I'll be meeting with your staff later this week to discuss some changes. I want this place to have a better reputation, one based on service and respect." He turned toward the two agents and they began walking toward the conference area. The staff watched in silence, a mixture of shock, confusion, and quiet admiration filling the room. No one expected a moment like this. A situation that started with rejection now turned into something remarkable. The same man they had looked down on was now the owner of the entire building. When they reached the business suite, the same one he had been denied earlier, the door was unlocked this time. The manager followed behind, apologizing repeatedly, but the CEO stopped him with a calm smile. "It's all right," he said. "What matters is what happens next." He walked inside, taking a seat at the long table. The real estate representative sat beside him, finalizing the remaining signatures. The atmosphere was quiet except for the sound of papers being shuffled and pens scratching across the pages. When everything was complete, the manager extended his hand again, this time with genuine respect. "Congratulations," he said softly. "This is your property now." The CEO smiled politely. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to what we can build here." After the meeting, he walked around the hotel with the manager, inspecting different areas: the lobby, the restaurant, the rooms. Everywhere he went, people whispered. Some looked embarrassed, others amazed. But no one could deny the truth standing in front of them. It was a moment of quiet victory, not the kind that comes from shouting or showing off, but the kind that speaks for itself. At one point, he stopped near a large window overlooking the city. The sunlight reflected on the glass, and he could see his own reflection. A man who had worked for years to build something from nothing, who had faced rejection more times than he could count, yet never let bitterness take over. This moment wasn't just about proving a point. It was about something deeper, showing that dignity, patience, and persistence could open doors that arrogance could never lock. The manager walked beside him quietly. After a long pause, he said, "I want to apologize for what happened earlier. That should never have occurred." The CEO nodded slowly. "Apology accepted. But I'm not angry. Sometimes moments like that remind us how important it is to lead by example." They stopped outside the reception desk again. The staff stood in a nervous line, waiting for his reaction. He looked at them all one by one. Then he smiled gently and said, "Thank you for your work today. I know it's been a surprising afternoon. We'll have a team meeting soon to talk about improvements, and I hope each of you will stay. I don't want anyone to lose their job because of one mistake. I want us to grow together." The relief on their faces was visible. The receptionist's eyes glistened with tears. She whispered a quiet thank you, and he simply nodded in return. After he left the hotel that evening, he sat in his car for a long time before driving away. He didn't feel the thrill of revenge or triumph. What he felt instead was peace, a deep, steady peace that comes from knowing he had turned a painful moment into a meaningful one. He thought of how easily he could have reacted in anger earlier that day, and how different the outcome would have been. But by staying calm, by focusing on action instead of emotion, he had gained something far more valuable than a hotel. He had gained control over his own story. As he drove through the city, lights flickered in the windows of buildings that once seemed far beyond his reach. He thought back to the early days when he struggled to make rent for his small office space, when every deal felt like a gamble. Those hard years had taught him something money could never buy: the strength to stay calm when tested. That night, he had dinner with his closest friend and business partner. Over a quiet meal, they discussed future plans for the hotel. He wanted to make it more than just another business property. He wanted it to be a place that stood for opportunity, a place where people of every background could feel seen and respected. His friend smiled and said, "You really turned that situation around in a way no one could have expected." He smiled back. "Maybe, but I didn't do it to prove a point. I did it to make a change." The conversation drifted to ideas for renovations, adding a modern conference center, redesigning the restaurant to feature local chefs, and creating community spaces for young entrepreneurs. Every idea reflected his vision: progress with purpose. Later that night, as he walked through his quiet home, he paused by a framed photo on the wall, an old picture of his first small office. It reminded him how far he had come. He smiled softly and whispered, "This is just the beginning." The following morning, news about the hotel purchase began to spread online. People were amazed by the story, how a man who had been refused service became the owner of the very place that turned him away. Journalists reached out for comments, but he declined most interviews. He didn't want to turn the story into a spectacle. He wanted the lesson to speak for itself. When he did finally speak publicly, his message was simple. Respect should never be a privilege, he said. It should be a basic part of how we treat one another. This isn't about revenge, it's about responsibility. His words resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. The story became a symbol of quiet strength and dignity. Some called him a hero, but he never saw himself that way. He saw himself as a man who refused to let anger decide his actions. A few weeks later, he visited the hotel again. The staff greeted him warmly, smiling genuinely this time. The atmosphere already felt lighter, more welcoming. As he walked through the newly painted lobby, he noticed the changes, small but meaningful touches that showed progress. He knew there was still work to do, but he also knew he was building something that would last. Standing near the front doors, he looked out at the city again. The same doors that once refused him now opened wide as he stepped through. And with that quiet step, he moved forward, not as someone seeking to prove his worth, but as someone ready to inspire others to rise above bitterness and build something better from it. Months had passed since that unforgettable day when the man quietly walked into the hotel and walked out as its owner. What once felt like an impulsive decision had now become one of the best business choices of his career. The hotel had slowly started to change under his leadership, not just in appearance but in spirit. The walls that once echoed with indifference now carried a warmth that every visitor could feel. Every morning he arrived early, walking through the lobby to greet the staff. He made it a habit to know them by name, to ask about their families, and to treat them as partners rather than employees. The receptionist, who had once looked at him with doubt, now smiled every time he entered. She had grown more confident, taking real pride in her work. It wasn't about fear anymore, it was about respect. Real, mutual respect. The renovation plans he had discussed were already taking shape. The old dull colors of the lobby were replaced with a modern design filled with light and space. He had brought in local artists to display their work on the walls, giving the hotel a sense of belonging to the community. The conference rooms were redesigned with the latest technology, making them more appealing for business clients. But more than that, he wanted the hotel to be a place that welcomed everyone, professionals, travelers, dreamers, and families. He believed a business should reflect the values of its people. So he started a training program for all employees, focused not just on customer service but on understanding, patience, and equality. Every week he would sit with small groups of staff members, listen to their stories, and encourage them to share ideas on how to make the place better. Some of them were shy at first, unsure if their opinions mattered, but over time they began to open up. Slowly, the hotel became a family, not just a workplace. One afternoon, while reviewing reports in his office, he received a call from a journalist who wanted to write an article about the hotel's transformation. He hesitated at first, but then agreed. Not because he wanted fame, but because he believed others could learn something from it. When the reporter arrived, she asked the question everyone always wanted to know. What made you buy the hotel after the way you were treated here? He smiled softly and replied, because it's better to build change than to demand it. The article was published a week later, titled, "The Man Who Bought the Hotel That Rejected Him." It quickly went viral, shared by people all over the world. The comments were filled with admiration, with people calling his actions inspiring and graceful. Messages poured in from young entrepreneurs saying how his story gave them courage. He read every message with quiet gratitude, but he didn't let it change him. To him, it was never about revenge or fame, it was about purpose. One day, as he was walking through the hotel restaurant, he noticed a young man sitting alone at a corner table, nervously holding a small notebook. The man approached him shyly and said he wanted to thank him. "I saw your story online," he said. "I was about to give up on my business idea. But after hearing what you did, I decided to keep going.